Hello everyone, it's Matthew McKenzie here again. I raise awareness of unpaid carers, especially those caring for someone going through long-term illness. You might have noticed that I also have started to raise more awareness on anti-discrimination, anti-racism, as you can see from this particular presentation or lecture on countering what seems to be now a big problem regarding the UK, in fact, globally, to be honest. And one of the reasons I am doing more of these lectures because I'm involved in, especially in the mental health system anyway, in focusing on reducing discrimination, racism, and better outcomes for minority groups. And if I wasn't doing these types of lectures or videos, then what on earth am I being involved in trying to combat this in the mental health system? But the big issue really is to think that this is just a mental health situation or problem is a big mistake because it involves, and I've always said this, it involves structures and systems outside of the mental health system, but obviously it seeps through um, all the way back into history. And it's a sad thing to say this, really. We've got an outgoing president of the United States and an incoming president because, and take note, I'm making this lecture off my own back. I'm not saying this to represent any other organizations, just my views. But I'm sure some of the organizations, well, most of the organizations would sort of agree in some sense of what I'm trying to raise awareness of. But going back to what I was saying, one of the main reasons for this is we've got a new incoming president, and not going to shy away from President Trump, who's known for rhetoric. And the UK has had a lot of taste from this rhetoric, from the riots to misinformation. And I did watch Biden's speech. He's warning on what we need to look out for. And this is, again, another reason why I'm doing this lecture. Um, and it's going to look at several things. Obviously, in the UK, and not just a UK issue, it's global, to be honest, but I specifically, because I'm from the UK, mention that it's important the UK needs now to start strengthening legal protections regarding political rhetoric. This is one of the main most destructive things coming from America, unfortunately, and from the incoming system. And it's been around for a while, to be honest. Trump has been in power before, but people are sort of scratching their heads thinking, what are we to expect? And, I know straight off what is going to happen, what will happen. So I'm not an expert on this type of thing, apart from lived experience of going through a lot of racism. And, that's another lecture for another day. I've lived through it and will continue to do so. But I want to try and educate others and help defend what is the most important thing I feel for everyone, including those who feel that they might have superior ideals or rights against other people. And the thing I want to defend most of all is our human rights, which are very hard fought for. We can't just throw them away because someone says a popular thing, hence the rise of populism. I won't go on too much, but some of the things I'm going to be covering anyway from this video is the importance of promoting inclusion and diversity to counter political rhetoric, damaging racist political rhetoric coming from the most influential government in the world, really. Talking about the States, obviously, but it's not only the States, there's other political rhetoric coming from other countries, but specifically the incoming president. We also want to look at form of ways of countering hate speech and empowering, and I've put this down as civil. Remember, when I do these anti-discrimination videos, usually at the end of those videos, I say to those watching, this is what I expect a civilized society to be in, and this is something we need to protect. We want to avoid more riots and more discrimination and hate speech because after a while things become very uncivilized. But then why, and I'll make it clear, why would I waste my time um, trying to do this video? So let's have a look at why I'm doing this, to be honest. So, yep, there's a new threat com coming from the incoming US rhetoric. It's not just Trump, it's other things as well. And it's not just rhetoric, but this video does look at trying to counter that. So we got the rise in far right and populist movements. So with that rhetoric, this is what's happening with, especially in Europe. We've noticed political parties, Reform, I'm not going to be ashamed to mention it, they have become more successful and they adopt Trump-like rhetoric. They emphasize the focus on nationalism. They have the focus on anti-immigration policies. Not that it's just anti-immigration. If it's legal immigration, then it's it's against it. It's always a lot of skepticism against the international corporations, especially the EU, which turned out to be a disaster anyway with Brexit. Then there's that shift on the political discourse. Mainstream parties now begin to start adopting harsher stances on immigration. Then you can look at the Conservatives and then the push against multiculturalism, but labeling everything woke as if it's a one fits all term for things that are very complex and very difficult to solve. And it's very dangerous. Then we get these um, far right alliances which begin to spring up, hence the focus on what Elon is trying to do amongst far right leaders and parties in Europe, back in the ADF and Reform, trying to unite a shared ideology and its opposition to liberal democratic norms. We also got the focus on and again, these are all threats. That's why I mentioned them. The focus on, again, when it comes to anti-immigration sentiment, stricter immigration policies and border controls, hence the arguments on national security and the economic protection, which is a bit of a catch-22 because with Brexit, that didn't go quite well with the economic situation in the UK. And unfortunately, if reform picks up the pace, we're going to be having economic protection globally, which is not going to work out. And then we've got the forms of cultural preservation, but it's specific. And then you've got rhetoric again targeting refugees, the ongoing negative framing of refugees and asylum seekers. Notice it's specifically focused on those from African, Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern. Again, pointing out threats to national security or even national identity. And then from the sentiment, it proposed forms of restricting even the rights, the asylum rights, and reduce support for refugee sentiment programs. And this again starts to seep into mainstream parties. The other things that's coming along with the rhetoric from the US, and again, these are the things I'm just mentioning as to why I'm doing this video, is the rise in xenophobia and racism. And there's statistics from you can back this up. And I suspect this is going to rise even further during perhaps the 2 to 4 years Trump is in power. So things to look out for will obviously be increasing hate crimes, especially racially motivated hate crimes. Often, obviously, they'll target Muslims, blacks, Jews, Eastern European communities. And then there'll be a focus on normalizing discrimination. Again, the similar language, woke, the reason this has to happen, um, as they would say, is to destroy the woke and destroy the weak because it's not particularly strong. And it'd be just using key terms to normalize it. Hence, making discriminatory rhetoric more acceptable to public language. To make matters more increasingly difficult, and this is again coming from Biden, has hence he mentioned avalanche of misinformation, and I'll get more into that. But the problem you have is now social media, um, which can be not only late. I mean, I use it and I use it to promote this sort of stuff. In some terms, it can be lazy journalism, and also it's now pushing the mainstream media out with information because you can get access to it from our phones, from the computers everywhere. So there's a growth of hidden and online communities that amplify that message of xenophobic and racist ideologies. And worst of all, you've got these conspiracy theories as well to make, some people are with conspiracy theories. They latch onto that and they're convinced. This is the danger of the rhetoric coming from the US. It's not just people of color that are targeted. Um, the anti-LGBTQ plus movements, something to look out for, and it's ongoing. So because of this, because of the rhetoric and the fear and power of the US, um, it was to repeal and weaken LGBTQ plus rights. It's just obviously the banning of gender affirming care and trans continued attacks on transgender individual, the cultural backlash of those groups, especially in media, education, public life, in often as again to protect what that rhetoric states as traditional values and the religious arguments, and there are those that use religious arguments, religious freedoms to deny services to LGBTQ plus movements. We also got the erosion of multinational corporations. So again, this is going. I'm specifically speaking about the EU on this sort of sense. So it's more about national sovereignty of a corporation. And again, I'm going to be very political on this one. Um, this now it's not just the cooperation with the EU is not just economic this time. It's more to definitely down to what's happening in Russia, what's happening with NATO. Um, so it's now become an ever more important issue. We cannot singly just go it alone and focus on nationalist ideals. It's a mistake. It's a trick. We also have the foreign policy shifts. Hence, again, the situation of isolationist policies. Again, this is a lot of this is again coming from the US about isolationist and reduced foreign aid and withdrawal from international agreements. Very dangerous when we go down that sliding slope. The anti-globalization movements, resistance to global initiatives on climate change, migration, trade, Trump-like narratives. Remember, this is Biden's warning. The impact on minority communities, Muslim ban-like policies, travel bans, visa restrictions. Again, this is definitely one of the things Trump again will focus on. Um, Increased policing and surveillance, especially on minority communities. And we must remember technology is increasing at such speeds. Who's to say that if we take rights away from others, it won't impact us? Not to say that should be the reason to push back on rhetoric and take a focused stance against racism and discrimination. We've also got problems with the impact on minority groups when it comes to school and workplace discrimination. Hence, there'll be more instances of bullying or workplace discrimination tied to Trump-inspired rhetoric. And these are, again, I'm trying to keep these things fairly short because I don't want this to overrun. But I'm just giving reason as to why I'm sort of doing this video, really. The other thing is the media and culture influence. So we got, again, the rise of media outlets, personalities mimicking Trump's communication style. Got these diversive and hostile towards anyone criticizing them. With the focus again of, and I've mentioned this before, the conspiracy theories that align with Trump's narratives, the election fraud, the focus on globalist rhetoric, anti-globalist rhetoric, and the increased use of public protests and riots, and labeling it as culture wars, when it should really be debates on free speech. But the problem is, and this is going back to Elon again, it might be free speech for one group or for himself, but not for others. And I think there's two more. We got the uh, the undermining of the institution undermining. What I mean by that is, politicians actually start attacking, the electoral process and independent media, the weakening of the rule of law that seeks to, not obviously checks and balances, but is to protect not just my troops, but all of us. And it's gone off the top of my head now. It becomes anti-democratic. And again, Biden's warning. And it's not just from the States. This is what I'm trying to warn in what's going to come the UK's way. It's going to be an avalanche of attack on UK, on other democratic countries across the world. So the thing to look out really when it comes to Europe and UK, because I mentioned, is the increased rhetoric around immigration control and stronger nationalist movements, even towards Scotland and Northern Ireland, and debates on multiculturalism again, and then the focus on Italy, hence, and France, Marie Le Pen adopting stronger Trump-inspired rhetoric, Elon's focus and support for the AEFD, far-right party of in Germany, um, and the link between Viktor Orban over in Hungary, parties in Poland, again, Trump-like rhetoric. So these are the things and that I feel, and it's not like they're new. They've been going on for a while anyway. That will be an increasing problem, something we need to watch out for over in the UK. So how can we counter this? And this is not even half of it. I'm just trying to keep this short. So the first thing, I've looked around, Googled around, and this is only against rhetoric. There's other things you need to look out for. So the things I mentioned is to protect against Trump-like rhetoric, and obviously is the law, strengthen legal protections against the the hate crime. You have to enhance hate crime legislation, expand the scope of hate crime laws to ensure robust protection for all minority groups, including racial, religious, LGBTQ plus, and immigrant communities. Not only enhance hate crime legislation, we have to monitor and enforce those laws. We can't just sit there in a desk, be passed, and nothing be done about it. Got to ensure adequate resources for law enforcement to investigate and prosecute hate crimes and provide training to handle these cases sensitively. A lot of this, again, the keyword here is online because a lot of it's coming from there. So it's that technology platforms to curb online hate speech. Very difficult because a lot of the the multi-mega corporations, your X, and it's a shame that Facebook's now dismantling the focus on fact checking. Um, and all this is again will impact not just the UK but Europe. So there must be working with those platforms to curb online hate speech, and if it's an ongoing thing, do what Brazil did, shut it down. Um, should be enforced to hold social media companies accountable for harmful content. So we have laws. We've got to in, make those laws stronger in regards to those things. So promote, and this is a difficult one because unfortunately, some people view this as woke. They label everything woke, 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 uh, without understanding the complexity as to why it's so important about our hard-won rights. So to counter this rhetoric, we still have to promote inclusion and diversity. It might not be the in-fashion thing these days. Education reform, so incorporate diversity into the education, into the school's curriculum. It starts from a young age. Without that, young people can get misinformation online. Include accurate teaching about, the colonial system, immigration, contributions from minorities to society. It's not just education. Remember the stuff that I mentioned earlier about the bullying. We need those workplace initiatives as well. It's in the workplace as well. So I'm looking at what starts when you're young, but also it's an ongoing thing. So incentivize businesses to adopt diversity and inclusion training, strengthen enforcement of anti-discrimination policies in employment. And these discrimination policies, unfortunately, does happen at the workplace. It is a big problem, and it needs to be looked into. We also got another way to counter hate speech and extremism. That's going to be a big problem now, when Trump gets in, is to counter hate speech. Obviously, using public campaigns. So, launch government-supported campaigns to promote unity, tolerance, and the value of multiculturalism. Like a multicultural society, and it's going to stay that way. Partner with community leaders to create messaging that resonates with local community. There is a problem with radicalization just on the news today. I've heard of a stabbing of a refugee, and that guy, I think, I've forgotten his name, got sent down for 22 years. So there's a lot of radicalization, but obviously to counter that, you need those de-radicalization programs. I'm sure there's some out there, but they're more important than ever now. So expand initiatives like Prevent to address domestic radicalization without disproportionately targeting specific communities. Not all radicals, but then it needs to be there. And engage with grassroots organizations that have community trust, that have earned the trust from the community to combat extremism at local level. Remember, this is specific to Trump-like rhetoric that can unfortunately lead to radicalization happening. Not Trump on his own. There are other groups that even Trump is a bit skeptical of, that because of his rhetoric brings them together, and then their sort of narrative is is ultra um ultra right, and the US system isn't any of those. Don't get me wrong, it's not ultra right, it's not far right, but there are parts of it that will come from that rhetoric. We also need to look at empowering civil society. As you see in the pictures here, they're not too clear. It's basically stalls on different cultures, learning about them, tasting their food, looking at their language, their history. So how do we empower civil society? Well, support advocacy groups, and then this is something coming out of the patient care race equality framework as well. I'm going to do quite a few more videos on that. I always feel that if organizations have it, it's not just a government thing. If organizations have a charity that can help increase funding for advocacy groups to protect minority rights and combat discrimination. Encourage those grassroots movements to provide platforms for community-based initiatives that promote dialogue, understanding, and solidarity. Without those movements, all we'll do is keep hearing the damaging narrative that disempowers civil society. Legal aid for vulnerable groups ensure that victims of hate crimes and discrimination have access to affordable legal support, not leave them on the run. And I should do a lecture on what happens if none of these things are followed up. Improving the community engagement. So what you see here is what's happening over in South London. We've got a museum, a refugee museum that looks at our shared history. We've all contributed something to a shared history. History in itself is very expensive. It can't be just thrown away. Never a good idea. So we must learn about it. And it starts with improving community engagement. And the local initiatives is to foster dialogue between different cultural and religious communities through events, workshops, and form. This is why I put that picture there. So that you got the event, you got the museums, got workshops. These can be held there. Encourage participation in the local governments by minority groups to ensure their voices are represented. And again, it starts with young people as well. So support programs that encourage youth engagement with politics and activism, especially from underrepresented groups as well. This is the big one, really, the media responsibility. So to counter Trump-like rhetoric, usually it's the fact-checking and accountability. So we've got to work with media outlets, especially the online ones, to prioritize fact-checking and responsible reporting. It's going to be very difficult, really is. I don't think it's an easy one. And this is particularly on immigration, crime, and minority issues. But we have to penalize those outlets. We've got to be brave enough to penalize them. Other countries have done it. Brazil did that to Elon. Didn't trust him, was meddling. So we've got to penalize outlets that intentionally spread disinformation or sensationalize diverse topics. And there's a discussion in the EU regarding this. Promote balanced coverage, encourage more representation from minority perspectives in mainstream media. It's not just having all these initiatives in place, you've got to monitor how they're working and adapt. And I suspect they will have to adapt over the coming years. We have to track the progress of these initiatives, assess the effectiveness of the anti-discrimination measures and adjust those strategies based on their outcomes. Research those trends, invest in research to understand how diversity rhetoric spreads and impacts on societal attitudes and behaviours and norms. So the conclusion to all of this, and sorry if I made this really long, I'm from the UK and I've seen what happens several times when Trump-like rhetoric goes unchecked. The UK can counter, it really can, the diverse effects of this Trump-style rhetoric by combining legal reforms, education, community engagement, advocacy, a collective effort. And I don't think this is easily going to happen. But if this is done, government, civil society, individuals, it's not just the government, it's everyone's responsibility to ensure and promote a cultural inclusion, protect these hard-won rights for everyone, not just minority groups, but it's for all of us regarding our rights and the dignity of all its citizens. And just as a final thing, it's not just a UK issue, but it has been impacted a lot, even before those riots. I'd like to say again, I'm doing this not as a representative of any other organization or group, but it's because I'm my own lived experience, and I'm involved, obviously, in the focus on, especially with mental health, um, promoting inclusion, promoting anti-discrimination, anti-racism efforts. I'd say if you felt this lecture was useful, and there'll be times, most of the times I'll just touch on unpaid carers, but I think it's fairly important because of my lived experience and what I've experienced, especially in the UK. It's really sad, a sad turn of things. And I think the last word really is, for evil things to happen, all we have to do is remain silent. And I feel it's important to leave the world a better place than what we've come into. Anyway, I'd like to say thanks for watching and look after yourselves.